Allow me to introduce you to ADAMA.
Atlanta is the Black Mecca. We know this already. We are home to people of African descent and the epicenter of arts and culture.
But where can you go to experience Black art and culture, illuminating the depth and breadth of the African diaspora?
Launched in March 2020 as a museum without walls, ADAMA quickly emerged as a space that is already engaged in communities around the world.
The best part about being a founding member of ADAMA
is knowing that I'm part of making history.
By contributing to ADAMA, you're joining a global community of dreamers and builders,
bringing forth a world-class museum
that highlights the Black global experience.
And it's all happening here.
Right here.
Right here.
Right here, right now.
Right here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Join us.
Give.
And get involved.
ADAMA.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you so much, panelists, for being here, for team for being here. My name is Rhonda Patrick. I am one of the board members on this amazing board, working with Fahamu Piku and other great creatives in this space. So I want to thank you to come to our fourth or so Arts Salon, third Arts Salon for the year. And I wanted to just give a brief talk or update on our upcoming fundraiser. We are turning 5. Yay! And very excited for it. And we actually have on our site, to guys check it out on the ADAMAATL.org. Our campaign is called 5 on It. If you can give $5, any amount more than that, and also do peer-to-peer campaigns. We're looking to also kind of increase our followers. So any of those opportunities to just kind of grow who we are, also are campaigning on getting the brick and mortar space. So we're hoping to continue to see that in the next maybe 5+ years. We're being aggressive. So thank you guys for coming, and I will switch it quickly so we can start this great talk. Book falling. So I want to at least first introduce and talk about our panelists for today. So first on the panelist is Raianna Brown. She is the founder and artistic director of Kamase Dance Theater. Raianna Brown in 2018 was Georgia Tech alum, exhibits the dynamism of modern young professional thought through her disciplinary works. While at GT, Raianna studied dance through dual enrollment at Emory University, where she, still an undergrad, she founded Kamase Dance Theater. Kamase sold out shows, integrated technology and the arts in the partnership with Georgia Tech Industrial Design School, Projection Mapping, and GT Intervention Studio, 3D printed costumes. The show centered on the narratives of marginalized people, with the most recent production created in partnership with Covenant House, a homeless shelter serving at-risk youth. Raianna has worked with the NAACP, the Atlanta Mayor's Office, and Grammy-nominated artists, including dancing alongside Shakira and Jennifer Lopez in Super Bowl 11-10. So thank you for being with us. Our next panelist is Anitra Terrell, thank you. An entrepreneur, storyteller, and champion for the African diaspora. Through her company, Reflection Design, she works with artisans in East and West Africa to create vibrant home decor that spotlights the beauty of African culture and the universal importance of home, no matter where it may be. She's the creator and host of the YouTube series How We Live, which celebrates the lives and homes of people across the African diaspora. Her pieces have been featured in Vanity Fair, HGTV, Essence, Better Homes and Gardens, Architectural Digest, and BuzzFeed, to name just a few. The Philadelphia native now calls Atlanta home, has a bachelor's degree of science, an MBA in marketing, and was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Cape Coast in West Africa. So thank you for being with us. Now, Okorie, who I'm going to call OK Cello because that's how I've always known you, is an Atlanta-based cellist, songwriter, looper, improviser, and storyteller. Okorie OK Cello Johnston's work centers on themes and expressions of the African diaspora, his personal truths, and a deep love and celebration of women, and a commitment to musical prayer. Drawing upon his experience as a teacher and writer, OK Cello immerses his audiences in vivid stories as well as songs, creating a richly layered and transcendent experience. So thank you for being with us, Okorie.
Thank you.
Now I'll give just a quick bio on our moderator for today. So Lance is an educator, educated at Belmont Abbey College and the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Lance is from New Jersey with a passion for history and exhibitions. Lance currently serves as the Director of Exhibitions at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights located in Atlanta. Lance previously served as the Education and PR Manager for the Margaret Walker Center and the COFO Civil Rights Education Center at Jackson State University, and serves as the inaugural Curator of Exhibitions at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. In those roles, he has used exhibitions to create dialogue along civic and civil and human rights history to help bridge the events from the past to current issues in the 21st century. So thank you, Lance. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm getting to know my friends sitting here. We've been chatting. And so this is going to be more just a conversation like we've been doing earlier this afternoon. And so we're going to jump right into the first question. And this conversation is about African expressions. And so what is African expressions in your field? And then I'm gonna start with you, Anitra.
In my field, African expressions is about creating spaces that reflect who you are. That's the foundation of what my company, Reflection Design, is all about. Expression your African origins and your connections to Africa in your home, whether it be through the decor, whether it be through pieces, family heirlooms from immediate family members. African expression to me means creating a sense of who you are at home so that when you step out in the world, you feel that much more empowered, that much more confident. Because when you come home every day, you see yourself. You see yourself reflected. You see yourself celebrated. You see yourself in all of your glory and your dopeness and your creativity. You see all of that reflected in the home.
Please.
I think my answer is interesting. It's very similar about seeing yourself reflected in something. In my work and my choreography and now directing films, my goal is for the audience member, specifically Black audience members, but also everyone, to see themselves held in high regard, and specifically like the ordinary things, the things that your grandma does when she's cooking, or when your mom walks around the house, or the way that you naturally move as a Black person, those things being highlighted and celebrated and put up on stages and put into films and museums, and seeing yourself in that way. In addition to like the rhythms and the different patterns that diasporic movement has in dance. But I really try to focus on highlighting the things that we see as just regular, and showing the divinity within them.
Cool. Such beautifully succinct answers. I'm going to try my best.
It was.
So I'm a cellist, and so on the surface, that seems to be a very European instrument. Although the tradition of stringed instruments does come out of West Africa, but for the most part, when people seeing a Black man playing a cello, they're assuming that I'm going to play like Bach or some classical composer. And so I guess the first layer for me of kind of disrupting that narrative is playing the music that I like to listen to. And so I grew up listening to Prince, I grew up listening to funk, I grew up listening to hip hop, I grew up listening to soul. And so that just kind of naturally comes out of me when I'm trying to make music that I like. I don't try to write music that fits into a particular canon. I just try to write music that really makes sense in my body, on my ears, and on my body, and you know, kind of on my instrument. So that would be like the first layer. The second layer, I would say, is that when I bow, I would say a lot of maybe the scales and some of the harmonies do feel somewhat European, right? But a lot of my songs, most of my songs start with bass lines. And most of my bass lines start with me playing pizzicato or plucking on my instrument. And I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm channeling upright basses or really just kind of rhythmic, polyrhythmic bass lines that are the foundation really of Black American music and really pretty much American music. And so because I feel like all of my songs kind of come up out of the bass lines that I create, I feel like the foundation is at least rhythmically African, West African, right? And then I would say the third layer is that I like to kind of endow my songs with narrative, right? So often I like telling stories of characters and protagonists in my songs within the African diaspora, right? So I like to talk about, there's a song I have where I'm looking at a Trinidadian family from the Windrush generation that traveled from Trinidad to the UK shortly after World War II. Or, you know, for kids, I do a thing on Black Panther, and often I have this one song about All in the Family, which is arguably not a Black show or not a West African piece. But what's interesting about the song, the theme song to All in the Family, is that it's written in the style of the American Songbook, which essentially is jazz, which essentially is African music written by Africans under duress here in this country. And I kind of I steal that melody and repurpose it in like an Afro-Cuban world, and I've written a sister melody that has more of like a African-American or an African pentatonic major feel to it. And I put those melodies in that song in conversation with the history of kind of whitewashed jazz of this country, and reclaim it, right? So that's kind of the work that I'm doing, just playing the music that I like, rooting it in bass lines, and then telling stories about African people throughout the diaspora.
Important. I think a common thread that I've heard you all said, first of all, it's beautiful, and thank you for articulating what that is to each and every one of you, but showing up as your authentic self is what I heard. I think what I do as a curator at particularly civil rights museums, it's getting people to recognize that Black people fighting for their civil rights are showing up as authentically themselves. And that's what the cry is. I want to show up and be seen. I want to be heard. And so I think the work, the art that you all are creating is saying that and doing that, especially through decor, especially through dance, and especially through music. We are here and we're being seen, and we will always be here. And then also equivalently that America is Black. We are this country, but yet also we take it to the diaspora. We are the world. We are everywhere in the world. Our sound, our smells, our looks, our styles. And so I just wanted to hit on that really quickly. My next question is, with that, keeping it in mind and then talking to you all previously or before this conversation on film, but how do you all get in the line of your work? And so I'm going to start with you in the middle, and then we'll go to you.
Okay. So dancing, I actually accredit my older sisters for that. I have two older sisters. I'm the youngest of three girls. My middle sister, Shireen, she started going to summer camp. Spelman had a summer dance and drama institute that we all went to at some point. We learned tap, jazz, African, ballet. We watched The Wiz every year. I definitely accredit Spelman for giving me a true like Black dance knowledge at a young age. But my sister came home when I was 3, and she took me to the side. There's a video of it, and started teaching me ballet and making me learn like everything that she learned. And then I started to kind of fall in love with movement. Then, if you ask my family, I've been dancing since I could walk. There's also videos of that. And then following that, when I was 5, my grandmother and my mom and my family took me to see Alvin Ailey and Lion King. And I just remember I was just in awe of seeing like the magic that was created on stage. It felt like I was transported somewhere different. I was only 5, so I didn't really have the words for it, but that feeling has always stuck with me. And from then I knew I wanted to dance. So then getting into directing, which is kind of a new development, that was actually kind of an accident. Well, it was pandemic that started that. And I pitched an idea to Fahamu. We really wanted to collaborate. And then we started working on films, and I found out that I actually really love directing. So it's interesting to see, for me, the connections between creating spaces on stage that reflect African-American art and African art, and transporting that into like the film context and the like multifacetedness that film has, and the things that you can do on film that you can't do on a stage. Like I can make people float in a film that I can't do that on a stage. I have to try to like pretend that that's happening. So it's really exciting for me to be able to delve into that space as well. But yeah, family and friends is basically the way.
Before we move on, can you talk about the challenges of switching or
Yeah.
working in film?
Yes. I think the hardest part for me is that I don't have a lot of technical knowledge yet. I can create stories, and I know that I can create a framework and build a narrative, but learning how to translate my ideas to a DP and explaining to a lighting designer for film what I want versus if it's a lighting plot on a stage, I know exactly how to like rattle those things out. But I've been very blessed to work with creatives like Fahamu and some of my best friends, Tanisha Wooden and Cameron Harris. We're kind of like a production crew together. And we work it out and we figure it out together. But that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is the technical aspects. But honestly, it's so overshadowed by the possibilities that are in film, and also the scalability of it, because with a dance performance, you have to be in person to really receive it. And our challenge that we face a lot is, how do we create that same feeling that you get from watching a dancer in person to film? Because there's a disconnect that's automatically there. But that, to me, that's an exciting challenge. The DPs that work with me, they end up running around a lot. They're basically dancing too. And so I try to choreograph their movement. But yeah, technical challenges, and then just really making sure that it feels just as visceral as seeing a dancer on stage, and feeling that and capturing the moment of a performance without it feeling repetitive or lackluster.
Thank you. Okorie.
So the question was, how'd you get
in your line of work?
I started playing the cello when I was 6, and I kind of fell into it. I might say that the cello chose me. There's an organization called the DC Youth Orchestra. It's been in existence probably since the 50s or 60s, maybe. My mom and my dad both played with DC Youth Orchestra. I played with DC Youth Orchestra. I've got a niece now that plays with DC Youth Orchestra, or at least did. And they teach you to play an instrument from no knowledge up to traveling around the country playing in their symphony. So I started at maybe 6, almost turning 7, and just enjoyed it. Don't know that I planned on being a cellist. I got good at it, and people started preparing me for music school and that kind of thing, but I didn't want to do it. I didn't. As a matter of fact, I put the cello down. The story of how I got into this is actually a series of, I'm not going to do the cello anymore. But the big moment would have been, I put my cello down at 17 or 18. They're 2 big moments. And then I was asked to pick it back up by my music director to play a concerto as a senior recital. And then at the end of that, I put it down again. And then a buddy of mine, I went to Morehouse. A buddy of mine was playing guitar on his balcony, and I was basically loitering, listening to him because it was amazing. And I had my cello with me, and he basically said, I don't think I'd like you to hang outside my door, but you can come inside and play. And I was like, it's a cello. What do you want me to do? He's like, figure it out. And so I started playing contemporary music at around maybe 19 on the cello. So like folk, soul, R&B, some goth, rock and roll, all that kind of stuff. And then there are a bunch of stories I could tell, but I won't tell, between then and 40. I left the class. I used to be an English teacher, and I left the classroom to produce a film that you didn't see because it didn't get produced. I was keeping the lights on. Interesting story. I was keeping the lights on by playing music, but my focus was on telling the story that I thought was really beautiful, but like, because there was no infidelity, no car crashes, no zombies and no vampires, nobody wanted to really fund it. So I was really miserable. And I would play the cello as a way of playing myself back to a certain sense of sanity.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just this one magical day on my 40th birthday when that process happened. And I ended up writing a song using a looper that pretty much changed my life, changed the moment in that moment. I realized that perhaps the most eloquent thing I could do was play music rather than try and produce a film. And then all of a sudden that song gave birth to 5 songs. I did a concert in January of 2015. That concert turned into a concert series. So I did a concert every month in 2015. One of those concerts was in London, another one was in DC. And by the end of 2015, all of a sudden something new had been birthed. And a process of kind of mining my own interests and tastes musically and creating music from those tastes had been born. So that's the story.
Before we move on,
yeah,
music is essentially, it does a lot. It heals.
Yeah.
And so you said something, and I want you to, please pull out, talk about the healing that music does, especially you playing your instrument.
I think generally music is healing, right? Because there's just this vibrational thing that's happening. One of the coolest things that someone mentioned to me was another musician who works in neuroscience. She said that your ears are the only sense that you can't turn off. Like you can close your eyes, close your nose. You don't have to taste anything. You don't have to touch anything. But if there's sound around you, even if you try and plug up your ears, your brain kind of registers it, right? So in that way, vibration is always talking to us. And music is perhaps vibration intensified, right? So our bodies are always taking some kind of, taking in vibration, right? But for me, you may have noticed I talk a lot. I like language.
We're here for a conversation.
We're here for that. And I am comfortable with words, perhaps maybe too comfortable with words, so that I can talk myself out of the danger of something, right? Like I'll still do the thing, but because I can talk, I can kind of convince myself that it's not scary or dangerous. The thing that's really powerful for me about being on the cello is that I don't really feel like I'm in control. I surrender whatever control I have with words to the power of sound. And from that moment to this moment, every time I sit at my instrument, I really feel like I'm following my cello and it is leading me to places. And I would say in some ways where my cello has led me has actually been the destination of the healing. So for me in particular, like I kind of personify my cello and I consider it sort of a priest of sorts. And I'm just trying to benefit from the rites that we create, the rituals, I should say.
Thank you. Anitra.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do I follow that?
So do you need the question again just to?
Sure.
Okay. How did you get into your line of work?
Okay. Similarly, family and walking away from things and then coming back to them. So my mother taught me how to sew probably around 11, somewhere between 10 and 12. And we used to sew pillows and we would sell them at craft fairs and at my school. And I enjoyed that a lot. But to your point, it was something that I enjoyed, but at the time I wasn't necessarily fully committed to it. So I walked away from it, went to school, did all the things, college and so on, ended up working in higher education as well as working in the entertainment industry. And at that point I was laid off. And at that crossroads, I sat and thought, what were the happiest moments in my life to that point as a source for guidance, direction, and inspiration? Like, what am I going to do now? Well, instead of feeling defeated, I said, let me focus on the happiest moments, because I felt like that is where I will find my answer. That is where I will find the next chapter. And a trip that I had taken to Ghana a few years prior to that layoff, I was there as a Fulbright scholar. And I was also contracted by the Boonshoff Museum of Discovery in Dayton, Ohio, as a textile buyer to purchase textiles for their museum. They were doing a traveling exhibit called Wrapped in Pride. It was about kente cloth. And I was there to purchase textiles for them. But I was also there to work the higher education side of my career. And so it was so transformative to spend time with the artisans to really see firsthand how kente cloth is woven, how wood masks are carved from start to finish, to see that process, to see how a dinker cloth is hand stamped. It changed me. And that trip, I was there for 2 months, and that time period kept coming up. Like, that's the time. But I still wasn't sure, what am I going to do with that? Yes, you had a transformative time, but how does that relate to paying your bills? Because
We got to be adults.
right? So I was in the store shopping for bedding. And, you know, we often go into stores and we see things on shelves like, yeah, this is nice, but it's not really like, oh, I gotta buy this. Kind of lackluster, and I thought, this is the connection. That was the light bulb moment. There was a void for authentic African artistry in home decor space at that time. We're talking about 2014, 2013-ish. And I felt called to that because I reminded myself, you know how to sew. You started selling pillows when you were a child. You enjoyed that. Connect that to where you are now, but expanding it to include wall art and textiles and all the things that are handmade in Africa. And from that point on, I said, this is the next chapter. And I started with pillows, because I thought this is a product that many people can relate to. Everybody needs pillows. And many of the African textiles tell stories. So that could be a conversation piece about not only the business, but the products that are created. And from that point on, it was on and popping. It was wood masks, tableware, bowls, everything. But to go back to the origin, it started with pillows, and it started with my childhood. It started with that experience of learning how to sew with my mother and learning how to sell. It's so interesting how our lives, we have those moments. It may seem like this was something that I did for 2 months out of my life when I was 7. But then you fast forward to when you're 39, 49, however, 28. And you're like, wait a minute. Those 2 months when I was 7 have totally informed
Who you are
now. And so I try not to take those moments for granted. And I think for all of us, it's something to think about, because we're often thinking ahead. How am I going to pay my rent tomorrow? How am I going to get my car fixed now? Instead of thinking, what are the things that have happened to me already? That can get me out of the situation, or that can inspire me, or, whatever that might be. And so that's kind of what got me into this industry.
So you making pillows with your mom, but I want to know, what was that first piece that you bought with your own money from the continent that said, you know what, I can start this process?
That's a tough one, because I bought a lot of things. I was there for 2 months in 2006. That was the first time I went to Ghana, and I had to buy 2 empty suitcases while I was there just to get everything back.
Okay, so give me one thing that you put in the suitcase.
Masks, wood masks.
Okay.
They're just...
What about them?
Their faces often. So they not only represent the art, but they represent the people who made them, because the artist is creating as a reflection of themselves or their tribe or their community. Masks are always, or often, I should say, used in rituals and ceremonies. So it's very layered. It's not just art. It's also story. It's also spiritual. With masks are and they look great on the wall. They add warmth to your home. they're textural. Sometimes they're made with metal. Sometimes they're made with olive wood and mahogany. So whatever vibe you want to create or whatever story you want to reflect in your home, wood masks are beautiful. So I grabbed a bunch of them, small ones, large ones. I grabbed a bunch.
Awesome. You hit on my next question, storytelling, right? And so we all tell stories in our craft. And so I'm interested, my question, I'm gonna start with you, Okorie, is how has storytelling played a role in your development as an artist?
So the first song that I wrote that started all this, I kind of mentioned it earlier. It was such a strange moment, right? Like, it was my birthday. I was miserable. I thought I was going to have to go back to the classroom, and I was feeling like that was a failure, or I thought I was going to have to write a movie about a vampire. And I felt like that was going to be a failure. And the way that song came into being was so notable, right? And so in some ways, it came with its own story. And because it came with its own story, it modeled the way that I would create other pieces, right? So the next major song I wrote was a song called Surrender. And interestingly enough, it was a song that I was commissioned to write. There's another cellist who's actually in my universe in a weird way. There are not that many Black cellists, particularly who she sings as well. She is like the best friend of my wife, who at the time when I was commissioned to write this song by this cellist, I didn't know my wife. And then some years later, I would come to meet my wife, and she would kind of like call this other cellist and be like, yo, is this dude cool? Is he all right?
Okay, love story.
So cool love story. But what was interesting about that story is like how it is, this moment, she was commissioned to write a song by a dancer with the theme Surrender. And we got on the phone and we started talking about what surrender meant. And so we pontificated for like an hour, and then we kind of broke the song into thirds. So we were going to write the middle part together. She was going to write the first part separately. I was going to write the last part. And for some reason, that third part to me seemed very West African. So I talked with her about, creating a song that put 3/2, which is kind of like when you think of like the djembe, ba-ba-da, 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 ba-ba-da. You're like, there's that kind of 3/2 engine that's always happening. So I wanted to put that into my music. And so I did, and I wrote this song, and it just like, it turned into this like doom doom thing. Like, it just, everything I imagined I've ever seen of like West African dance, like I was trying to capture in that song. Well, I shared it with my cellist, my former cellist, with my collaborating cellist. She's, oh, this is great. She shared it with the person who bought it. And she's like, oh, that's amazing. We only like 17 seconds. And I was like, what? Wow. I just wrote a 4-minute song. She's like, I know the beginning, the first 17 seconds are amazing. That's all I want. And I was like, all right, but I wrote this song. And I was like, well, I'm going to use this song, right? So I used the song, and it was the second song that I wrote. And the combination of it being West African in spirit and named Surrender, which is essentially an invitation to the process that was unfurling in my life, it also modeled the idea of a story. So I don't know, it just seemed like this is how this works. I find myself in a space where music comes through, and in music coming through, it's trying to share something with me about my moment. And I just try to figure out what that thing it's trying to share with me is. And more often than not, it becomes the story that I'm telling. Because I'm Black and comfortable with that and looking to find connection to the diaspora, to the continent, my stories just end up coming through that, that posture. And so, I don't know that I want to take too much credit or acknowledge too much agency and the like, yeah, so I write stories and cellos, it's really important. It's not really that. It kind of comes through, and I just try to listen as best I can, capture it, and then polish it up and share it.
I think that's ancestral.
Absolutely. It really feels that way.
I think that's the word.
It absolutely feels that way. And I think, I've got a lot to say about language, but I think more often than not, the grammar around creativity it misrepresents the process. Most of the artists I know, art comes through them. That idea of creating art puts so much it endows the agent with so much power, so much origin. And I just never feel that way. I feel like a conduit. And so maybe that's also the point of the storytelling, right?
So coming through, Raianna, so I'm sure the rhythms and the music, the flow comes right through. Please. So yeah. Okorie's taking us on these spiritual journeys over here. And so my question is, how has storytelling played a role in your development as an artist?
Okay, I have a long answer, but I'm gonna try to move through it. So when I started choreographing, I used to choreograph dances for me and my neighbor. That's really where I started. We would perform for my parents. And then my first real choreography job was doing the musicals at my school. My high school, I went to a predominantly white high school, Paideia High School. But I learned how to teach and how to tell stories that were pre-written for me. But I think when I really stepped into choreographing was when I was at school at Emory. I was in the dance program, and Eric Garner got killed while I was in the Emory dance program. And we were, Emory is a very postmodern dance program. I'm very grateful for my experience there and all the teachers. However, I didn't have any Black teachers there, and we were performing pieces about how momentum moves through space and how it's very abstract. And all of the other Black students, we would hang out after class, and we all felt very, very frustrated because it felt like there were all these things going on in the world, but we were expected to show up to class and be around mostly white students and act like everything was fine, or just focus on the momentum or how I could move to the floor, which I think are very beautiful things. But as an artist, I felt very unheard, and then my friends did as well. So I got asked by some people I met, Emory, some Black students, to create a piece for the Black History Month Gala. And so I asked my friends, I'd never done anything like that before on that scale with dancers who I was training with. I asked them if they were down to dance, and we created a piece. I choreographed it, but I felt more like I was staging it because I wanted everybody's stories to be involved. And so we created a piece called I Can't Breathe. I was dedicated to Eric Garner and victims of police brutality and racial injustice. And it was a very special moment for me and the other dancers, because it was the first time I felt like I created something that truly spoke to our experiences rather than just being telling a story in a musical or something like that. I remember all my friends from Georgia Tech came. I went to Georgia Tech. And so all my friends from Georgia Tech came to the performance, and they came up to me afterwards and they were like, thank you for making this. And I was extremely overwhelmed by that response. But the interesting thing that happened after that, I showed it to my modern teacher, George Stabe, who I wholeheartedly credit him for breathing life into me and my choreography. And he was like, oh, who made this? And I was like, oh, I did. And he was like, you want to take it to Italy this summer? And I was like, what?
Okay.
It was my junior year of college, no, maybe sophomore year. I'd finessed my way into studying dance at Emory for free. So I was just really happy to be there. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I never out the country, I didn't have a passport yet. I was like, you want me to choreograph? And he was like, yeah, my company goes to Italy every summer. I would like you to bring this work. We'll support you in figuring out how to premiere it and everything. So I went to Italy, and that was a very unique challenge because I and one other dancer were the only Black dancers in that program. So then I had to figure out how to translate a work that was made viscerally by my peers at Emory we were just getting out what was inside of us and make it still read to an audience in Italy who didn't have the context of being a Black American, and to dancers who didn't have that experience. And I remember I was so frustrated. I was crying after my first rehearsal. And luckily we had a Black teacher there named Marjani Forte, who I love Marjani so much. I went to her room and I was crying, talking to her and her husband. And she was like, well, you have a story to tell and you have to figure out how to translate it to your dancers. It's like, you can't just rely on yourself and rely on people already knowing what you're trying to say in order to tell your story. So she told me to make a brain map. And that's when I started using that in my creative process. I'm cold, so I'm like shivering. And maybe I'm emotional, I'm not sure which one. But so talking to her and walking through that process was really interesting. So I had to figure out how to explain police brutality to a lot of international dancers, white dancers who honestly didn't really, it wasn't in their perspective at the time. So we watched, I left the room, but I was like, I'm gonna turn on these videos so you can see the news and the things that we're seeing every day and the things that I'm being inundated with by seeing people who look like me murdered at an extremely high rate and what that feels like. And so we got through the rehearsals, it was very emotional. And then we premiered the piece in Italy. And I had one dancer who spoke Italian. So before the piece premiered, she came out and she said, the piece is dedicated to those who have lost their lives to police injustice and racial injustices and police brutality in the United States. And that was the only context we gave. We did the piece, and so many people we performed in this like small town square in Sant'Agata. Italian people came up to me and they were like, I don't know what's going on in the United States, but your piece moved me. I want to help. Like, however, what can I do? And that was a really special moment for me because I learned the power of movement because we don't speak the same language. They were having like translators talk to me and explain how they were feeling, but I was able to like touch them and reach past the conscious and move into their subconscious. And so from that experience, sorry, this is such a long answer, but I took that brain mapping process into the process of how I create. And I learned the importance of weaving stories together. So now when I work on pieces like our show Skid, which is based on homelessness and gentrification in the city of Atlanta, my goal was to make sure that my dancers felt like their stories were being told. And so we were telling the stories of homelessness. I had also never experienced homelessness before, but I also feel like African-American people often are a homeless people in the sense of that we exist in a place that does not want us to call it home. And I've done like the ancestry thing, so I know like where my genetics come from, but I don't necessarily feel like I can go to a certain country on the continent and be like, this is where I'm from. Yeah. And so that was revealed to me through the process of making the show. But we also interviewed youth from the Covenant House and got their story. So that was actually the narrative to drive the show. And so I guess, long story short, storytelling for me is about integrating the story that I'm trying to tell, the story of the dancers that I'm working with, the story of the people whose voices I'm trying to amplify, and weaving those all together so that it feels organic, it feels natural. I often don't tell my dancers the other dancer's story. I'll have individual meetings with them and be like, okay, this is who you are in this space and this is how I want you to move. So then when I interact with another dancer, it's just how my character will interact with you, and it creates this really nice, organic, almost like world on stage that they get to become and be a part of. So storytelling is really important to my process.
But it was good. You took us on a journey of how you create your process, which I think is important. I think being a curator at a civil rights museum, we're always stuck to say you have 150 words or 50 words to do a label or a text, right? So I'm constantly thinking, and I'm from a city. I'm from Jersey City. It's now been gentrified, so people think it's a beautiful place. But growing up there, and when I show up and do my work, I'm always thinking about people who look like me. How do I simplify the language? How do I make it relatable? So I think that process of mapping is critical in what you do, and it's critical in what I also do. So, Anitra, same question. I think interior design is an art form in itself, right? And the textiles, the colors, the patterns that you're choosing. How have you gone through that creative development as an artist yourself?
Really quickly, I want to touch on the storytelling
Please,
piece
this is a conversation. Yes, and storytelling. Yes.
because similarly, oftentimes when you're either creating art yourself or you're showcasing the art of others, you want to make sure that everyone's story is told. You don't want to leave anyone out. You don't want to seem like you're purposefully only focusing on one side of the story. So when I created the YouTube series, How We Live, it really was to tell our stories from the person who lives in the house, not from me saying, this is what I like about your home. I wanted the homeowner to say, this is what I love about my home, and this is why I love living here. These are the items in my home that make it feel special and unique to me. Because like many of us, we flip through magazines, we watch TV shows in the home decor space, and we very rarely see ourselves represented at home in a positive light. It's either usually drama, people flipping over tables, throwing drinks in people's faces. We rarely show ourselves expressing joy at home. Because guess what? We're happy at home too. It's not just drama or trauma. It's we love to entertain. We invite friends over. We cook Sunday meals. We cook Tuesday night meals. We listen to music. We do all the things. And so storytelling for me is not only telling the story of the homeowners and the How We Live series, but also telling the stories of the artisans in Africa who actually make the pieces that end up in our homes. Who are they? So to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and represented.
Awesome. So I have one more question and we're going to throw it to our audience. Is there a proverb or figure of speech that is popular in African diaspora that resonates with you right now? So I can go first. I don't know if it's African diaspora, but I can tell you it's Desiree Wheeler's proverb. That's my mama. And it's to break a man is to break his race. Right. And so my mother taught me at a very young age when I was little, 5. She said, well, do you love me? Yes, Mom. Marry a woman that looks like me. Marry a Black woman. So as I got older, that was also issued over and over and over. Then I got older. I said, okay, she said it to me again. She was like, well, as a African American that lives in this country, you can trace your lineage back to slavery. You're not going to be 100% African, but you can recognize who you are as a Black man, support your community, marry a Black woman, have beautiful Black babies, and be proud of who you are and where you come from. So that's my mama's proverb: to break a man is to break his race.
I wish we had more time because I want to dive into that.
Yeah, we can
saying
have it.
Right
we
there.
Can have it. Yeah, we can.
Wow.
After this.
If I may go next.
Yeah, please.
One proverb that I love, it's an African philosophy, so it's used throughout the continent. They may pronounce it differently, as you were saying about the dialects, but the term is called Ubuntu, and it means I am because we are. And I love that because it speaks to not only recognizing self, but recognizing one's connection to their community, to their ancestors, to the culture, to the world, to the diaspora. And the more we think about ourselves as a part of a greater collective, the more responsibly we'll move through life. Whereas in other cultures, it's all about the individual. No regard for nature, no regard for animals, no regard for anything. But Ubuntu says, no. We are all connected. From the trees to your neighbor, we're all connected. And so that's one of my favorites.
It's beautiful. Anyone?
In all honesty, I'm not 100% sure that this is an African proverb. I associate it with being an African proverb, and I couldn't tell you what specific country or community.
We could add more to it. They won't fact check.
But I think the thing that I'm perhaps in my life most fascinated with is the idea that the story of the hunt is different when the lion tells the story.
Oh yeah, you're right.
That is
right,
yeah.
But it's something to that effect, right? And I think one of the main differences and powers, I think, between us and our ancestors, right? So we have the power to broadcast our stories. And this is going to sound strange. I'm not critical of journalism, but I don't think that the journalism posture is the most courageous. I think the most courageous posture is that of myth, because it is myth that creates reality, right? It is the story of what can be that ends up birthing what will be, right? And so as storytellers, I feel like we have a power to bring into fruition that which will be, right? And so in that sense, the perspective of the hunt from the lion is massively important, not just of what has happened, but I think of the imagination of the lion to tell what will be. And I think that's what I'd like my music, that's what I'd like my art to be invested in, creating the imaginative conditions necessary for birthing a new world.
He said he loves words. He said he loves words. He said he loves words. I need you to come out with a poetry book or something next. So.
Thanks, John.
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, well, speaking of poetry, mine is, I guess it's like newer. It's actually a poem from Nair Waheed, who is one of my favorite poets. It's called As You Are. And it's one of my favorite poems. Gotten me through a lot of darker times. But essentially, the common thread of the poem is it's as you are right now is perfect. And the last line of the poem is she's speaking to the universe and she's saying, like, the narrator is saying, I'm going to butcher this compared to the actual poem. So you guys should look it up, As You Are by Nair Waheed. But they say, the universe says, as you are. And she says, when? And the universe says, as you are. And it says, how? And you keep asking these questions of, like, when I get to this place, what I'm doing. And the last line is, as you are, the universe says, through tears, because you don't see how beautiful you are right now, just existing. And I think that especially in the world of dance, there's so much criticism that's built into you from, like, age 5. As soon as you start dancing, you learn how to critique yourself in the mirror. Every second you're trying to fix, make sure your line is right. But I think what's really beautiful about movement, especially Black people, when we move, is it just comes out of us. And so if you allow yourself to be as you are and just move, that is enough. And that is enough to get your story across and to just be, honestly, because like you were saying when we started, that's what we're fighting for, to just exist, just to be here and be ourselves and be authentic and create space for ourselves to celebrate each other. So yeah, that's my favorite.
Beautiful. Now we're gonna turn to our audience if there's any questions.
Sorry. I got a jacket. Sure.
Okay.
I think it was on.
It's on. Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
Yeah, it could be a little louder.
Okay, awesome. I can speak louder.
Okay.
Pleasant good afternoon to those seen and unseen. Thank you so much for being here and offering your wisdom and experience. I'm going to ask a variation of a question that I asked to a lot of panels. It's a simple question. So my name is Takia, proud board member of ADAMA, so really happy to be here and be able to be in your presence. My question is actually around belief systems. So please share what belief system did you have to release as you navigate, and then how did that shift your expression, your African expression specifically?
I can start. That I had to prove something in order to create art, I think, is something that I really had to release as a creator of art, or that I had to prove that, like, the art that I was making was important, rather than letting it flow and trusting that what would come out was what was supposed to come out. And that's something I'm still, figuring out, is not trying to appease or create something to get into a certain space, but authentically create. Yeah.
So I don't know that I held this too strongly, and I think I'm really grateful for the fact that I didn't go to music school or conservatory, because it would have been drilled into me. But I play an instrument that has a long European tradition, right? And it has these classical composers that have written repertoire for the instrument. And there are a lot of cellists that find it very difficult to think outside what those composers have lit the world to be, right? And because I didn't go to music school, because I didn't go to conservatory, I don't have as much of that to kind of unlearn. But the one thing that I was really committed to was that, you know, I wasn't going to play Bach. And I will not validate myself or have anyone have to validate me because of how well I play Haydn or Bach, or because that's just not what I do. What I am going to do is to give birth to a consciousness through my music that makes sense to me, and it won't be, you know, ratified or affirmed by the great white dead people. So that was me.
That's a tough one. I would say maybe letting go of the, I don't know if it's a fear or maybe it's a assumption that people won't be interested in what you're doing, or the people that you want to be interested in it won't be interested in it. When I launched How We Live on YouTube, it was April of this year, so it was very recent. And because it's YouTube, you think there's millions of channels and people are watching all kinds of things on YouTube. How are they even going to find my little new show? And how are they even going to be, are they even going to be interested? And, you know, and when I tell y'all, people were coming up left and right, like, this is wonderful. I've been waiting for this. I love seeing us. I've learned so much. Because it's not just, oh, look at my pretty house. It's really more of a conversation, but images of their home are shown throughout the conversation. I'm really talking to the person at the home about who they are and their background and some of their design choices, color choices, but it's really more about them. And so the response has been really positive. And at that point on, it was like, oh, it's game time. Like, now that I know, you know, to hear someone else's feedback. I mean, you may think what I'm doing is really, really great, but when the people that you want to touch feel it and their response is positive, it kind of gives you that supercharge, like, okay, well, let me keep going and let me take it to another level. And how else can I serve them? So letting go of the belief that what you're doing is not valid, or what you're doing may or may not even be seen, or may not even be wanted, but it is. It really is.
I would say for me, I've had the privilege to move very quickly in my field. And so I would say patience. I think being in spaces that I am in, there's not a lot of Black curators in my field. And so it's not a lot of Black men doing this work. So it's always that added pressure, like, you are it. You're helping lead the field. There's get more professionals in here. But so I'm putting myself on a time clock. Like, I got to do this by I'm 35. I got to do this by I'm 40 to help ushering another group of professionals to come into the field. And so I've learned my wife is teaching me to learn to be patient with myself. And I think I really learned that in 2020 because God said, hey, I'm going to break your ankle and break your leg. And so I had to sit down and figure those things out, and to be in patience with myself and recognizing, relax, things will happen when time accords to it. So thank you for the question.
Kind of do like one question. This is a little like one question and kind of also shameless plug. So as I think about, so we have an exhibit for those of you guys that are here. SA, who was one of our fellows last year, did an amazing exhibit around Black gaze and Black bodies and what does that look like for masculinity and of course in hip hop. But as I think through just how much amazing work you guys do here and just that correlation with the African diaspora, right? Looking at that perspective from someone who is in Ghana and seeing, you know, how that view is of, you know, Black America, our history. How do you guys kind of feel at this point in our space? Are we representing the African diaspora in a way that I think may be social pleasing, but they understand? I always feel like sometimes it's a disconnect. Are we talking and sharing what we're trying to do, our experiences, like, you mentioned just about like the pieces that you bring back and how you wanted to at least show the representation, explaining that to people here, our ancestry. How do you feel that's coming back as well with those in West Africa and in different spaces when we try to bring, that here to our culture?
One of the most important things when I created Reflection Design was to make sure that the artisans are paid a fair livable wage off the top. And often when I do pop-up events, people say, well, how are you getting these pieces? And is it fair trade? And so I say to them, it's not really about fair trade, it's about economic empowerment. I talk with the artisans like they're business owners as well. Many of them have a group of artisans that work with them. They have, here's our line sheet for this season. Here's what we're producing in the village. Or I'll say, here's the designs and the colors that I'm interested in doing, and we collaborate in that way. And so they're paid from the beginning. Nothing gets shipped here, rightfully so, until they are paid. And so I like people to kind of first kind of unlearn how those relationships and those narratives can be. It's not always, oh, woe is me, these poor Africans. And because that's how people tend to approach me. Like, oh, are you giving a percentage of your profits to the people? No, they get paid before I get paid. Facts. And that's the way I want it to be. Economic empowerment, because when they are paid for their work up front, they're helped, but future generations are also helped as well, because then they can afford to send their children to school and the possibilities of their children become much more limitless. And so I think is one of the first steps to being in control of what's happening in the diaspora is kind of rethinking what we do in the diaspora. It's about conversations like this, but it's also about doing business together, economic development, and through that, then we can realize, oh, it's not just charity all the time. It's not just about charity. It's about building, about nation building, diaspora building, in a way that, again, not only benefits me in my present time on this earth, but also future generations, my niece, my nephew, as well as the artisans and their families. I think that's an important piece to kind of look at. We have to start reshaping how, and kind of unlearn to the previous question about things you have to let go of, is kind of letting go of that. The only way you can work within the diaspora is charity, and everyone's so downtrodden, and that's the only thing, but no, there are many businesses throughout the continent that are leaps and bounds ahead. And telling that to others, it's not all gloom and doom in Africa, Many of the cities are very metropolitan. So I think that's a part of it too, is letting go of some of those stereotypes of how we see ourselves, how we see others in the diaspora, and then having different conversations about how we can work together is part of it in my industry.
I would also say, as a historian, right, I think getting people to recognize that our stories does not start with the transatlantic slave trade, and saying that we have a point, we have a motherland that we can go back to and read and study, but yet also we're looking at from the civil rights lens, recognizing that our movement starts because there's a movement happening on Africa, right? And those practices and those strategies we're going back home to bring back to the States. I always tell people, for example, Medgar Evers, first NAACP field secretary from Mississippi, is studying Jomo Kenyatta. What are they doing? What practices are we going to take back to bring home here and learn? I think also look at Kwame Ture, right? And recognizing that the SNCC itself and the Black Power movement is recognizing there is Black people, there's a continent that we come from, that we are empowered. And so getting people, particularly catching them when they're young, like children, and like having these conversations and looking at imagery that sees us as heroes, right? Also, but winning, right? And I think also changing those images to color. Because if you're showing, at least to my 8-year-old, if you're showing my 8-year-old a picture, he thinks that happened a long time ago. I was born in the 90s. He thinks I was born 40,000 years ago. So I think meeting them at an age early on and having those conversations, but yet also connecting our history that we are constantly talking about when it comes to the African American experience in the United States, is not always bad. There is a victory, there is honor in our storytelling and where we come from. And so getting them to recognize that early on.
I don't know if I have an answer to this yet. I think that I could like finagle one, but I haven't been to the continent yet. So I have exchanges with friends who study like Afro beats and African styles of dance, and I've learned West African dance, but I don't know if I have a solid answer. So I'm going to step back respectfully.
I hope that I can, again, succinct answer. So I'm going to try my best. I think the real beauty of art for me is in its capacity to communicate outside of language, outside of words. I think that there's some real powerful opportunities for revolution in that, specifically because, and I'm not excited about saying this, but our consciousness for most of us is defined and limited by our language, and all of us, for the most part, many of us on the continent speak colonial languages. And that's a conundrum. That's a thing that's hard to negotiate, right? At the very least, on the continent, there are lots of communities that speak a language that isn't exclusively colonial. I, however, only speak English. So I lean on my cello's ability to communicate outside of the construct of a colonial language. And I'm hoping that it's speaking something soulful, that it connects to another soul without having to be translated through the language of oppression. I'm really excited about the possibility of creating a language, a post-colonial language, that allows us to kind of rearrange the orientation of ideas, and particularly of concepts that are so violent in colonial languages, such that it is a new world of language and consciousness that maybe through which we can re-meet our diasporic brothers and sisters in a new way. But until we have that language, what we have is art. And I believe in the power of art to communicate soul to soul rather than brain to brain.
This is the last question.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I wanted to ask, and it's simple, but it's important to me. How do you find balance? As different artists, you all have different genres. They're quite different from one another. How do you recalibrate? What do you do to recenter? How do you find time for your health, your wellness? None of us are monolithic, right? So we live layered lives. Like, what do you do to find balance?
I can go first. I'm still trying to find that. But I tell, for me, it's because I'm constantly talking about civil and human rights. I will go home and just lay on my couch and watch cartoons, talking to my wife, hanging out with our child. But I'm still trying to figure out that balance. I think I'm gonna speak for myself. I think the work that I do, I put it on my shoulders because I've been gifted the work that I do. It's a privilege to tell stories of freedom fighters and being in conversation with them and them telling me, this is your job. We fought. I need you to tell our stories. It's not an easy thing to put down. And so yes, I've kind of figured out what I need to do to reset, but am I really finding the balance? No. I think I can find balance once I leave this earth. I think I'm here for a purpose to make sure that I uplift our stories and people know who we are and how we show up in the world. So.
I can go. I feel really self-conscious sometimes talking because I always can go, but I'm always like looking at like other folks like,
go,
yo, what is
go.
Yeah, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at that at all. Actually, you're asking that. I'm not good at that at all. But I have a different way of looking at it a little bit because I think everything that we look at depends upon the frame of analysis, right? So is the frame of analysis the day, or is it the week, or is it the decade, or is it like the lifetime, right? And I think that my life kind of began anew at 40. Prior to 40, I think I was in a preparation phase. And I honestly felt like I did a lot of resting then. I think I did a lot of preparatory resting. Now I had kids and, you know, all that stuff was there, but I would say kind of spiritually and intellectually, I was not dormant, but in preparation. There was this massive pendulum swing that happened at 40, and the spiritual, intellectual, artistic energy has been significantly more frenetic. And so if you're measuring the frame by the day or the week or the month, maybe it's not particularly all that balanced. But if you're measuring it by like the last 20 years where you're looking at going back 10 and then going back 10, that middle point, it does, I think, have some balance or some shape to it. So I'm hoping that the arc of my life represents the balance and allows me to do what it is I needed to do in moments of preparation and moments of activation.
He said it for you.
He's the hardest one to go after. I know, every time, just dropping gems. Sis, it's a day-to-day struggle. If you ask my doctor, she'll tell me, find something that you love because you're stressed out and it shows in terms of health. You know, it shows. So I've been really intentional about trying to figure out what those things are going to be for me that give me the balance. And so I'll have to talk with sis over here about dance because that is one of my favorite things to do when I was younger. And it still is. But incorporating, you know, essential oils and just things to even if it's just for that day, like how can I feel less stressed out today? That's a start, because then you could take those tools and apply them to the next day and the next day and the next day. I would also say having the right people in your life. You know, I'm grateful to have my partner here. Who, yes, you, as a sounding board and a rock and a, you know, that shoulder when I go on tangents and I'm just bawling and, but I think to his point, perspective and taking it a day at a time and figuring out, as I said earlier, think about your past. What brought you joy when you were 6? What brought you joy when you were 10 or 16 or 22, whatever the age? I'm pretty sure that same thing will bring you joy now, as long as it's constructive and it's not, you know, a lot of things we did when we were younger that brought us joy or not. We shouldn't be doing that no more. But the good things that we did when we were younger, kind of look to those as a source. And that's helped me begin the journey of finding balance. But I'll tell you right now, it's not easy, especially when you're doing the things, you're doing a lot of the work yourself. You know, I don't have a big team. I've been in business almost 10 years and it's still pretty much me and Wesley. I've had contractors work with me on particular projects, but the day-to-day, it's me. And that can get really tough. Because as I said before, when the rent is due, they don't want to hear, well, not so many people came to the website today, so can't pay the rent. They don't want to hear that. So that can bring on a whole host of stressors, but just keeping things in perspective, keeping good people around you, and looking inward to the things that have brought you joy in the past to help guide you to joy in the present and in the future. But also exploring new things. You might find something you've never done before as a source as well.
My answer is very similar, that, I'm figuring it out as far as balance. I do a lot of things. In addition to dancing and directing, I work as a software developer. I have a production company. I also dance professionally, like in movies and TV shows and all that stuff. So I kind of feel like this all the time personally. But meditation has been helping me a lot. Talking with friends, especially friends that don't dance, like friends that like aren't artists in the same, like for a career in the same way I am, don't dance, like grounding myself in the fact that like there is also real life and not just like my artwork that I'm pouring into. Learning how to rest. I'm really trying, I don't know how to do that yet. And I realized that this year kind of showed me that. And so, learning the importance of that, especially because like I am fairly young for where I am right now in my career, and that I don't foresee it slowing down, but I need to learn how to slow down so that I can keep up, if that makes sense. So really like forcing that into myself right now, and also talking to older relatives. Like I talk to my grandma a lot about how I'm feeling and about how to rest, and asking questions that like I wouldn't necessarily normally ask older relatives, just like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on in your life? But really like delving into the things that I'm struggling with that balance, because they've also lived a lot of life and they also had a lot of things to deal with and had to learn how to rest. And I think rest is something that was denied to us a lot as a culture and as a people. And so reminding myself that that is just as important as the art that I'm creating, because if I curate a life of rest and balance, and I will also proceed to extend that to my community. So yeah.
And so thank you. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon and sitting down and having this conversation with us. And I also want to thank the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta for having us and have this conversation, and Pittsburgh Yards for hosting this conversation. So I'm going to pass it on. For announcements, no announcements. Okay, so we just want to say thank you again, and you all have a good Sunday.